The rain hammered against the grimy windows of Cole Auto Repair, casting twisted shadows across oil-stained concrete. Veronica Sterling burst through the door, her designer heels clicking frantically against the floor, mascara streaking down porcelain cheeks. Behind her, Miles Donovan's silhouette loomed in the doorway, whiskey thick on his breath. Ethan Cole looked up from the engine he was rebuilding. Grease-blackened hands, pausing mid-motion. Their eyes met hers desperate. His confused. She grabbed his collar with trembling fingers, pulled him close enough to smell motor oil and honest sweat, and whispered words that would change everything. "Kiss me. 5 minutes. Please." He hesitated only a heartbeat before his lips found hers, just as Miles stepped inside, freezing at the sight. Ethan Cole had once been somebody. 5 years ago, he'd worn pressed shirts and Italian leather shoes, striding through the gleaming halls of Sterling Motors as their lead aerospace engineer. His designs had revolutionized the Valkyrie prototype, a supercar engine that promised to redefine luxury performance. He'd had a corner office overlooking Manhattan, a team of 12 brilliant minds under his guidance, and most importantly, he'd had Sarah, beautiful, fragile Sarah, with her artist's hands and poet's soul. She'd been 8 months pregnant when the prototype exploded during testing, killing 2 junior technicians. The investigation had been swift, brutal, and wrong. Someone had altered the technical reports, modified the timestamps on his design approvals, painted him as a reckless engineer who'd bypassed safety protocols for glory. Within 48 hours, he'd lost everything: his position, his reputation, his health insurance. That last loss had been the cruelest cut. Sarah's rare blood disorder required treatments that cost $8,000 monthly. Without coverage, they'd burned through their savings in 3 months, sold their apartment in 4, moved to her mother's basement in 5. The memory of her final days still haunted him, the way she'd gripped his hand in that sterile hospital room, machines beeping their electronic dirge, whispering that she wasn't afraid, that she knew he was innocent, that he needed to be strong for their son. Lucas had been 4 years old, too young to understand why mommy wasn't coming home, old enough to feel the weight of his father's grief. Ethan had packed their few remaining belongings into a decade-old pickup truck and driven until he found a place where nobody knew his name. The garage had been abandoned, its previous owner dead from a heart attack, the building available for a song. He'd rebuilt it with his own hands, the same hands that had once sketched revolutionary designs, now changing oil and replacing brake pads. Every night, after Lucas was asleep, he'd sit at his workbench and stare at the leather notebook containing his original Valkyrie designs, complete with dates, calculations, and the proof of his innocence that nobody would ever see. He'd taught himself to find peace in simple things. Lucas's laughter over breakfast, the satisfaction of an engine purring back to life, the smell of coffee at 5 in the morning before the world demanded anything from him. The morning after the kiss, Veronica Sterling stood outside Cole Auto Repair, her midnight blue Bentley looking absurdly out of place against the cracked asphalt and chain-link fence. She'd spent the night replaying those 5 minutes, the unexpected gentleness in the mechanic's touch, the way he'd held her like something precious rather than a prize to be won. She knocked on the door, designer sunglasses hiding eyes puffy from crying and lack of sleep. Ethan opened it, his expression shifting from neutral to guarded when he recognized her. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice smaller than the commanding tone she used in boardrooms. "And apologize. What you did last night," he cut her off with a raised hand, his voice flat and professional. "You needed help. I helped. We're even." She pulled out her business card, ivory cardstock with gold embossing, pressing it into his reluctant hand. "If you ever need anything." Lucas appeared from behind a Toyota Camry, oil smudged on his freckled nose, and read the card aloud with 9-year-old enthusiasm. "Sterling Motors, Veronica Sterling, Chief Executive Officer." The change in Ethan's face was instantaneous, color draining as if she'd slapped him. His fingers crushed the card into a ball, trembling with barely contained rage. "Get out," he said, voice dangerously quiet. Veronica stepped back, confused and hurt. "I don't understand. Sterling Motors destroyed my life," he said, each word precise and cutting. "Your company murdered my wife." She opened her mouth, closed it, searched for words that wouldn't come. I've only been CEO for 2 years, she finally managed. My father ran the company before. I don't care about your corporate ladder. Ethan interrupted. I care that your name is on the building that took everything from me. Lucas watched with wide eyes as his father, always so controlled, shook with emotion. Dad? He said softly. And that single word seemed to pull Ethan back from the edge. He knelt beside his son, gathering him close, voice gentling. It's okay, buddy. The lady was just leaving. Veronica didn't leave, not immediately. She sat in her car for an hour, fingers flying across her phone, pulling up old employee records, searching for Ethan Cole. What she found made her stomach turn. Brilliant engineer, spotless record for 6 years, then suddenly terminated for gross negligence following the Valkyrie prototype disaster. 2 technicians dead, federal investigation, insurance claims denied. She remembered that incident vaguely. She'd been in London then, handling Sterling's European expansion, only hearing about it through corporate emails. Her father had assured her it was handled, that the responsible party had been removed. But something felt wrong about the reports she was reading. Inconsistencies in the timeline. Witness statements that didn't quite align. She thought about Ethan's eyes, the raw pain mixed with resignation, and made a decision that would upend everything she thought she knew about her company and herself. The photograph appeared online at 7:43 the next morning, grainy but unmistakable. Veronica Sterling, billion-dollar CEO. Locked in an embrace with an unknown man in a rundown garage. The headline was salacious and cruel. Sterling heiress slums it with grease monkey. Desperate? Or just bored? By 8:15, it was trending. By 9, the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Veronica sat at the long mahogany table, facing 12 stern faces, while Gerald Morrison, the lead board member, cleared his throat disapprovingly. This behavior is unbecoming of Sterling Motors' leadership, he said, sliding printed copies of the article across the polished surface. Our stock has already dropped 3 points in pre-market trading. She kept her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. My personal life has no bearing on my professional capabilities. Your personal life, Morrison countered, becomes our concern when it affects the company's reputation. Who is this man? She thought about lying, creating some elaborate cover story. But exhaustion and frustration won. Someone who helped me when I needed it. She said simply. Nothing more. Miles Donovan, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Come now, darling. We both know there's more to it than that. You disappeared from our engagement party to play damsel in distress with some nobody? The other board members shifted uncomfortably. The engagement between Veronica and Miles, while not official, was an open secret, a merger of power that would benefit both their companies. I needed air, she said carefully. You'd had too much to drink. His jaw tightened, but his smile remained. Perhaps we should ask this mechanic to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Make sure he understands his place. The suggestion sent ice through her veins. She stood abruptly, gathering her papers. I'll handle it. But she had no intention of silencing Ethan Cole. Instead, she drove back to his garage, finding him underneath a Honda Civic, only his legs visible. You need to sign this, she said, placing a document on his workbench. Though her voice carried no real conviction, he slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked at the NDA with something between amusement and disgust. A non-disclosure agreement, he said flatly. You want me to pretend that kiss never happened? She couldn't meet his eyes. The board is concerned about the company's image. He stood slowly, walking to a locked drawer in his desk, pulling out a worn leather notebook. You want to talk about signing things? Let me show you something I signed once. He opened it to a page near the back. A termination agreement with Sterling Motors, dated 5 years ago. They made me sign this to get my final paycheck. 2-week severance for 6 years of service. And a clause saying I couldn't sue for wrongful termination. I needed that money for my wife's medicine, so I signed. She died 3 weeks later. His voice remained steady, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the notebook. So no, Miss Sterling, I won't sign your paper. I'm done letting your company force my signature on lies. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and guilt. Finally, Veronica picked up the NDA and tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the oil-stained floor. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm going to look into what happened to you. The real story, not the corporate version." He laughed bitterly. "Don't bother. The dead don't come back, no matter how much truth you uncover." But she was already gone, her heels clicking with determination. That night, she called in favors from old contacts, accessing archived files that required CEO clearance. What she found in those documents would lead her down a path she never expected, toward a truth that would shatter her trust in everything she'd built her life upon. The forced partnership came through a call from Gerald Morrison at 6:30 in the morning. "The board has found a solution to our public relations problem," he announced without preamble. "You're going to hire that mechanic as a technical consultant for the new Valkyrie S project. Turn this scandal into a heartwarming story about Sterling Motors supporting small business owners." Veronica nearly dropped her coffee. "That's insane. He has no current credentials." "He has experience with engines, doesn't he?" Morrison interrupted. "Make it work, Veronica. The announcement goes out at noon." She wanted to refuse, knowing how much Ethan despised her company, but Morrison had already hung up. She drove to the garage, finding Ethan teaching Lucas how to gap spark plugs, their heads bent together in concentration. "I need you to listen before you say no," she began, explaining the board's demand. Ethan's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, a calculating look she couldn't read. "They want me back in Sterling Motors," he said slowly. "Working on the Valkyrie project. It's just for show," she assured him quickly. "A few weeks, some photo opportunities, then you can go back to your life." But something had shifted in his demeanor, a spark of the engineer she'd glimpsed in those old personnel files. "The Valkyrie S," he repeated. "That's based on my original designs, isn't it? The ones they claimed were flawed?" She nodded reluctantly. "We've made modifications, but the core concept, I'll do it," he interrupted, surprising them both. "But I have conditions. First, Lucas comes with me when he's not in school. Second, I want access to all the original Valkyrie files. Third, I work hands-on with the engine, not just posing for pictures." She wanted to ask why he'd changed his mind, but the determined set of his jaw warned against questions. "I'll make it happen," she promised. Lucas looked up at his father with shining eyes. "Does this mean we get to see the fancy cars?" Ethan ruffled his son's hair, a genuine smile breaking through his stern expression. "Yeah, buddy. We get to see the fancy cars." Their first day at Sterling Motors was a study in contrasts. Ethan arrived in his decade-old pickup truck, wearing clean but worn jeans and a flannel shirt, while the facility gleamed with chrome and glass around him. Engineers in pristine lab coats watched skeptically as he examined the Valkyrie S prototype, running calloused fingers along fuel injection ports, listening to the engine's rhythm like a doctor with a stethoscope. Veronica observed from behind reinforced glass, remembering suddenly why his name had seemed familiar even before the scandal. She'd been an intern when he worked there, barely 22, fetching coffee and filing reports. She'd attended one of his presentations on adaptive combustion technology, mesmerized by his passion, the way he made complex engineering sound like poetry. He'd been different than younger, obviously, but also lighter, quicker to smile, eyes bright with possibility rather than shadowed by loss. She wondered if he remembered her at all, the eager intern who'd asked too many questions, who'd stayed late just to watch him work. "The compression ratio is wrong," Ethan announced, stepping back from the engine. The lead engineer, Dr. Patricia Hawkins, bristled. "That's impossible. We've tested it extensively." At sea level, Ethan interrupted calmly. "But the metal fatigue patterns suggest you've been testing at altitude without adjusting for atmospheric pressure variations. The original Valkyrie design included automatic adjustment mechanisms. Did you remove them?" Hawkins pulled up the specifications on her tablet, frowning. Those mechanisms were deemed redundant after the incident. They weren't redundant, Ethan said quietly. They were essential. That's why the prototype failed. Someone disabled them before the test. The room went silent. Veronica felt her heart rate spike as she watched Hawkins review the data, her expression shifting from skepticism to alarm. "My God," Hawkins breathed. "You're right. If these mechanisms had been active during the original test, 2 people would still be alive," Ethan finished flatly. "And I wouldn't have spent 5 years fixing other people's mistakes in a garage." Miles Donovan arrived during the 3rd week of Ethan's consultation, ostensibly to review quarterly projections but really to stake his claim. He found Veronica in the testing facility, watching Ethan explain engine dynamics to a group of junior engineers. Lucas perched on a stool beside him, sketching in a notebook. "Quite the happy family scene," Miles commented, his tone deceptively light. Veronica didn't turn from the window. "He's brilliant," she said simply. "The team has learned more in 3 weeks than in the past year." "Brilliant men can still be dangerous," Miles replied, moving closer, his cologne overwhelming in the sterile space, especially when they have axes to grind. She finally looked at him, seeing something in his expression that made her stomach turn. "What do you mean?" "Just that people who've lost everything have nothing left to lose," he said, then smiled his boardroom smile. "We should discuss the wedding plans over dinner. 8 o'clock at Le Bernardin?" She agreed just to get him to leave, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying his words, the way he'd looked at Ethan through the glass like a predator sizing up prey. That afternoon, she found Ethan alone in the workshop, recalibrating fuel injectors with mechanical precision. "Miles came by," she said without preamble. "He seems very interested in your work here." Ethan didn't look up. "Miles Donovan has been interested in my work for years," he said quietly. "He was the primary investor pushing for the Valkyrie prototype to be rushed into testing. He was also the one who recommended the investigation team that found me guilty." The implication hung between them like a charged wire. "Are you saying I'm not saying anything that I can't prove?" Ethan interrupted. "But ask yourself this. Who benefited most from my removal? Who took over the Valkyrie project after I was gone? And who's been pushing for its revival now that the heat has died down?" The company gala was Miles's idea, a celebration of the Valkyrie S reaching its testing phase, but really an opportunity to parade Veronica on his arm, to remind everyone who held the real power. She wore a crimson gown that made her look like blood against the white marble of the hotel ballroom, smiled at investors and board members while her mind churned with suspicions she couldn't voice. Ethan attended only because his contract required it, looking uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo, Lucas beside him in his first real suit. They stayed at the edges of the party, Ethan nursing a single glass of whiskey while Lucas marveled at the ice sculptures. Then Miles took the stage, champagne flute raised, voice carrying across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to Sterling Motors' future. And to the woman who makes it all possible." He gestured for Veronica to join him, and she had no choice but to comply, feeling every eye in the room upon her. "Of course," Miles continued, his smile sharp as glass, "we must also acknowledge our temporary consultant, Mr. Cole, who's been assisting with the project." The way he said assisting made it sound like charity, and several people chuckled. It's admirable how Sterling Motors supports the working class, even those with checkered pasts. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Lucas, however, looked up at his father with confusion and hurt. "Though I suppose," Miles added, swirling his champagne, "we all deserve second chances. Even if our first chances ended in tragedy." That was the line crossed. Veronica stepped away from Miles, her voice cutting through the room. "Mr. Cole's first chance didn't end in tragedy," she said clearly. "It was stolen from him by someone who falsified reports and destroyed evidence." The room went silent. Miles' smile faltered. "Darling, you're confused." "I'm not confused," she interrupted, pulling a folder from her clutch documents she'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. "I have the original server logs showing someone accessed and modified the Valkyrie test reports after the accident. Someone with executive-level clearance. Someone who stood to gain from Ethan's removal." She handed the folder to Gerald Morrison, who opened it with trembling fingers. Other board members crowded around, their murmurs growing louder as they read. Miles set down his champagne, his composed mask finally cracking. This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of a disgraced engineer over the man who's been manipulating this company for years? Veronica finished. The same man who pushed for unsafe testing schedules, who had the most to gain from the patents being reassigned. Ethan stood slowly, moving through the crowd with Lucas beside him. He pulled out his leather notebook, the one he'd carried for 5 years, and placed it on the table before Morrison. Every design, every calculation, every safety protocol I recommended, he said quietly. All dated, all in my handwriting, all proving that the failures weren't in my design but in the execution, an execution I wasn't allowed to oversee because I was removed from the project 3 days before testing. Morrison's face had gone pale. Other board members were pulling out phones, calling lawyers, the party dissolving into chaos. Miles tried one last gambit, turning to the crowd with manufactured outrage. This is clearly a conspiracy between them, he announced. That kiss in the garage, it was all planned. They've been working together to what? Veronica interrupted. To expose the truth? To get justice for 2 dead technicians and a destroyed family? She moved to stand beside Ethan, not touching him, but close enough that her position was clear. Yes, I kissed him that night. Because I was running from you, Miles. From your drunken advances and your entitled grabbing. He protected me when I needed it, just like he protected this company's integrity years ago, and you destroyed him for it. Security appeared at Morrison's gesture, moving toward Miles, who backed away, his face cycling through rage, disbelief, and finally, fear. You'll regret this, he snarled at Veronica. Both of you will regret this. Lucas had been silent through the confrontation, but now he stepped forward, his young voice clear and steady. My mom died because of you, he said to Miles, and the words seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Because you took away our insurance. Because you lied about my dad. The raw honesty of the child's accusation did what no adult argument could. It stripped away the corporate veneer, the political maneuvering, leaving only the human cost of Miles's ambition. Several board members looked away, unable to meet the boy's eyes. Ethan placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder, his voice rough with controlled emotion. That's enough, Lucas. But Lucas shook his head, pulling out his sketch notebook, showing pages of detailed engine drawings. Dad taught me that machines don't lie, he said. They either work or they don't. People lie. People like him. He pointed at Miles, who seemed to shrink under the child's unwavering gaze. Morrison cleared his throat, his voice heavy with authority and something that might have been shame. Mr. Donovan, you're no longer welcome at Sterling Motors events. Your investment will be returned in full. If you attempt to interfere with our operations again, we'll pursue criminal charges. Miles left without another word. His retreat watched by hundreds of people who would spread the story through the industry within hours. Morrison turned to Ethan, his expression formal but sincere. Mr. Cole, on behalf of Sterling Motors and its board, I offer our deepest apologies. We failed you, and we failed those who died. We'd like to discuss full reinstatement, back pay, and I don't want your money. Ethan interrupted quietly. I want my name cleared. I want my designs properly credited. And I want a college fund established for the families of the technicians who died. Morrison nodded immediately. Done. Anything else? Ethan looked at Veronica, something shifting in his expression, a wall finally coming down. I want to finish what I started. Let me complete the Valkyrie S properly this time, not as a consultant, but as lead engineer. The board members exchanged glances, then Morrison extended his hand. Welcome back to Sterling Motors, Mr. Cole. The applause started slowly, then built to thunderous approval. But Ethan wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Veronica, who had tears streaming down her face. Mascara be damned. Thank you, he said simply. And she knew he meant for more than just the job. Lucas tugged on his father's sleeve. whispering something that made Ethan smile, the first real, unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "My son wants to know if he can still visit the workshop," Ethan said. "He's been designing modifications for the cooling system." Veronica laughed through her tears. "He's hired. Youngest consultant in Sterling Motors history." The following months passed in a blur of 18-hour days and breakthrough moments. Ethan transformed the engineering department, his quiet intensity inspiring younger engineers while his experience guided the veterans. The Valkyrie S evolved from a powerful machine into something transcendent, every component singing in harmony. Veronica found herself spending more time in the workshop than the boardroom, ostensibly overseeing the project but really drawn to the peace she found there. Away from corporate politics and social expectations, she could just be herself, not the billion-dollar CEO, but simply Veronica, who loved the smell of motor oil and the sound of Ethan explaining thermodynamics to Lucas. She learned to hand him tools without being asked, to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, to make his coffee exactly right black with 1 sugar, which he'd never admit to wanting. Lucas became a fixture at Sterling Motors, his after-school hours spent in the workshop, homework spread across a workbench, while he absorbed engineering through osmosis. The employees adopted him as a mascot, teaching him everything from welding to coding. He started calling Veronica Ronnie after hearing his father use the nickname once, and she never corrected him. The three of them developed an unspoken rhythm dinner at the garage on Tuesdays, Ethan's spaghetti sauce simmering while they reviewed designs. Saturdays at the test track, Lucas timing laps while Ethan drove, and Veronica analyzed telemetry. Sunday mornings at the diner where Sarah used to waitress before she got sick, where the owner still remembered their order and never charged them for Lucas's pancakes. The truth about Ethan spread through the industry like wildfire. Job offers poured in from competitors, each more lucrative than the last. Ferrari wanted him in Maranello. Tesla offered him complete autonomy over a new division, but he turned them all down, staying in the garage turned home, where he'd rebuilt his life piece by piece. Veronica never asked why he stayed, afraid the answer might not be what she hoped. Then one evening, as they worked late on final adjustments before the Valkyrie S launch, he spoke without prompting. "Sarah would have liked you," he said quietly, hands still moving over the engine. "She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me disappear into my work, who'd drag me into the light." Veronica's hands stilled on her tablet. "I'm not trying to replace I know," he interrupted gently. "That's why she would have liked you. You're not trying to be anything other than who you are." The conversation shifted something between them. An acknowledgement of what had been building for months. They still didn't touch beyond professional necessity, both too aware of how their relationship had started, too conscious of the ghosts between them. But the air grew charged when they were alone. Words carrying double meanings. Glances lasting too long. The engineering team started a betting pool on when they'd finally admit what everyone could see. Patricia Hawkins, who'd become Ethan's fiercest advocate after initially doubting him, cornered Veronica in the bathroom one afternoon. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon," she said bluntly, "and you look at him like he's the only solid ground in an earthquake." "So what's the problem?" Veronica wanted to explain about professional boundaries, about respecting his late wife's memory, about the complexity of their history. Instead, she said, "I'm scared," and was surprised by her own honesty. "Of what?" Patricia asked, her voice gentling. "That it's real," Veronica admitted. "That kiss in the garage, it was supposed to be pretend. 5 minutes of fiction, but nothing with him feels fictional anymore." Patricia smiled knowingly. "Honey, the best things in life start as accidents. The question is what you do once you realize it's not an accident anymore." That night, Veronica stood outside Cole Auto Repair for 20 minutes, gathering courage. When Ethan opened the door, grease under his nails and exhaustion in his eyes, she said simply, "I'm not your boss right now. I'm not a CEO. I'm just someone who can't stop thinking about you." He studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Lucas is asleep," he said quietly. "Coffee?" They sat at his kitchen table, the same one where he'd fed his son breakfast every morning for 5 years, where he'd paid bills he couldn't afford, where he'd planned a future that seemed impossible. "I dream about her sometimes," Ethan said suddenly. "Sarah, She's always smiling, always telling me it's okay to be happy again. His fingers traced patterns on the worn wood. For years, I thought honoring her memory meant staying miserable. Like happiness would be a betrayal. Veronica reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. She loved you. She'd want you to live, not just survive. I know, he said, turning his palm up to interlace their fingers. It just took me a while to believe it. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, while the old refrigerator hummed, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Finally, Ethan spoke again, that night in the garage. When you asked me to kiss you, I thought it would just be helping someone in trouble. But the moment our lips touched, I felt something I thought had died with Sarah. Not love, not yet, but possibility. The Valkyrie S launch exceeded every projection. The engine Ethan had perfected broke 3 industry records. Orders flooded in from around the world, and Sterling Motors' stock soared. The board voted unanimously to establish the Phoenix Foundation, a fund for displaced engineers and their families, with Ethan as director. But the real victory came in smaller moments. Lucas's proud grin when his cooling system modification was incorporated into the final design. Patricia Hawkins publicly crediting Ethan with saving the project, Morrison personally apologizing to the families of the technicians who died. The press, eager for redemption stories, painted Ethan as a phoenix risen from ashes, but he declined most interviews, uncomfortable with celebrity. The few he gave focused on engineering, on second chances, on the importance of truth in corporate culture. Miles Donovan's fall was swift and complete. The FBI, alerted by Sterling Motors' evidence, opened an investigation into corporate fraud and manslaughter. His assets were frozen, his investors fled, and within 3 months, he was facing federal charges. He tried once to contact Veronica, a rambling voicemail about forgiveness and misunderstandings. But she deleted it, without listening to the end. The past couldn't be changed. Only learned from. She had more important things to focus on, like the boy teaching her to play chess during lunch breaks, or the man who'd started leaving her flowers on her desk every Monday. Simple daisies from the market. Nothing fancy, just something to brighten corporate sterility. The second kiss happened at the Phoenix Foundation's inaugural gala. Held not in a grand ballroom, but in the Sterling Motors workshop, among the machines and memories. Ethan wore the same rented tuxedo, more comfortable now in formal clothes, but still preferring work shirts. Veronica had traded designer gowns for a simple black dress that wouldn't show oil stains. They'd spent the evening apart, mingling with different crowds, but always aware of each other's location, orbiting like binary stars. As the evening wound down and Lucas dozed on Patricia's shoulder, Veronica found Ethan standing beside the completed Valkyrie S, running his hand along its curves with proprietary pride. "It's beautiful," she said, moving beside him. "Your masterpiece." "Not mine," he corrected. "Ours. None of this would have happened without you believing in the truth." She turned to face him fully, seeing in his eyes what she'd been afraid to hope for. "Ethan," she began, but he stopped her with a gentle finger against her lips. "I know what you're going to say," he said softly. "That we should be careful. That there's too much history. That people will talk. And you're right about all of it. But Ronnie, the nickname, made her heart skip. I've been careful for 5 years. I've been safe and smart and completely miserable. You walked into my garage like a hurricane and woke me up. So if you're willing to risk it, to try building something real from that 5-minute fiction, then I'm all in." She answered by grabbing his collar, the same gesture from that first night, but confident now. Purposeful. 5 minutes was never going to be enough, she whispered, and kissed him properly this time. No desperation or pretense, just 2 people choosing each other despite the odds. The workshop erupted in applause. They'd gathered an audience without noticing. Employees and board members alike celebrating what had been inevitable for months. Lucas, suddenly awake, ran to them, and Ethan lifted him with one arm, while keeping the other around Veronica's waist. "Does this mean Ronnie's going to be around more?" Lucas asked, with 9-year-old directness. "If she wants to be," Ethan said, looking at her with a question in his eyes. "Every day," she promised. Ruffling Lucas's hair. Someone has to make sure you both eat vegetables. Morrison approached with champagne, his stern face softened by what might have been tears. To second chances, he toasted, and the room echoed the sentiment. But Ethan raised his own glass with a different toast. To 5 minutes that changed everything. A year later, Cole Auto Repair had been transformed, but not erased. The original garage remained, a working museum where Ethan still fixed cars on weekends, teaching Lucas and neighborhood kids basic mechanics. But adjoining it rose a modern facility, the Phoenix Center, where displaced workers learned new skills, where single parents could get vehicle repairs at cost, where second chances were manufactured as carefully as precision engines. Veronica had stepped back from day-to-day CEO duties, appointing Patricia Hawkins as COO while she focused on the Phoenix Foundation. She kept an office at the garage, a converted supply closet that Ethan had renovated with his own hands, complete with a window overlooking the workshop where she could watch him work, could see Lucas grow taller and more confident with each passing month. They married on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays had always been spaghetti night, and it seemed fitting to make it official on their day. The ceremony was small, just Lucas, Patricia, Morrison, and a few engineers who'd become family. Veronica wore her mother's dress, altered to fit. Simple white cotton that moved like water. Ethan wore his father's suit, navy blue and slightly dated but perfectly pressed. Lucas served as both ring-bearer and best man, solemn with responsibility until the moment Ethan said "I do," when he let out a whoop that echoed through the courthouse. Their honeymoon was 3 days at the cabin where Ethan had proposed, beside the lake where Sarah had taught him to fish, where he'd taught Lucas to swim, where past and present merged into future. The Valkyrie S won every major automotive award that year, but Ethan skipped the ceremonies, preferring to spend evenings in the garage. Lucas on one side learning calculus through carburetor adjustments, Veronica on the other managing foundation applications while grease worked its way under her manicured nails. She'd learned to find beauty in the mess, in the controlled chaos of creation. The three of them had dinner at 7 sharp every night, sacred time when phones were banned and work stayed outside. They talked about everything and nothing. Lucas's science fair project on alternative fuels, Veronica's plans for expanding the Phoenix Center nationally, Ethan's quiet dream of designing something that had nothing to do with cars, maybe aerospace again, maybe something entirely new. Sarah's birthday came in September, and they visited her grave together for the first time. Lucas placed a bouquet of daisies, Veronica's contribution, and a miniature engine he'd built himself. Ethan spoke quietly to the stone, introducing Veronica properly, thanking Sarah for sending him someone who understood that love wasn't replacement but addition, that hearts expanded rather than divided. Veronica stood slightly apart until Lucas grabbed her hand, pulling her into their circle. "Mom would say you're family now," he said with the certainty children possessed about important truths. That night, going through old photos, Ethan showed her one from his wedding day, him and Sarah laughing, covered in cake frosting. "She always said I'd need someone to take care of me after she was gone," he said softly. "I told her I could take care of myself." He looked at Veronica, eyes bright with unshed tears. But she knew better. She knew I'd need someone who wouldn't let me just survive. The Phoenix Center's first graduating class included 43 people, aged 18 to 67, each with a story of loss and resilience. The graduation ceremony was held in the Sterling Motors workshop, now a symbol of redemption rather than corporate power. Miles Donovan's conviction had made headlines, but the real story was in the audience: families reunited, careers restarted, dignity restored. Ethan gave the keynote, his speech simple and direct. Everyone deserves the chance to rebuild. Sometimes, that chance comes from unexpected places, from 5 minutes that seem meaningless, but change everything. Don't waste those 5 minutes when they come. Afterward, a young woman approached, one of the technicians who died in the original accident's daughter. She thanked Ethan for the scholarship fund, for ensuring her father hadn't died for nothing. They cried together. Strangers bound by tragedy transformed into something like hope. Lucas designed the Phoenix Center's permanent logo at age 10, a bird rising not from flames but from a gear assembly. Mechanical and organic merged into something new. It became Sterling Motors' secondary brand, stamped on every engine Ethan touched. a promise that innovation and integrity could coexist. The boy grew confident in his skin, no longer the shy child hiding behind his father, but a young man who knew his worth wasn't determined by others' opinions. He called Veronica Mom for the first time on a random Thursday, casually, while asking for help with homework. She had to excuse herself to the bathroom, where she cried for 10 minutes, overwhelmed by the simple grace of earned belonging. 5 years after that first kiss, they stood in the same garage, now expanded but still containing the original lift where Ethan had first seen Veronica's desperate eyes. The rain was falling again, gentler this time, a spring shower rather than a storm. Lucas, now 14 and taller than Veronica, was at a robotics competition 2 states away, winning prizes with designs that merged his father's precision and his mother's vision. The garage was quiet except for the rain's rhythm on the roof. "Do you ever think about how different life would be if you hadn't run in here that night?" Ethan asked, pulling her close. "Every day," she admitted. "And every day, I'm grateful I did. That 5 minutes gave me everything I never knew I needed." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, tasting of coffee and possibility, while outside the rain washed the world clean. When they pulled apart, he was smiling that rare, complete smile that transformed his face from handsome to beautiful. "5 minutes," he murmured against her lips. "Best investment I ever made." She laughed, the sound filling the garage with warmth. Interest rates were pretty good too. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the rain create rivers on the windows, thinking about journeys that began with desperation and ended with joy. Somewhere, Lucas was probably explaining to judges why his robot's cooling system was revolutionary. Somewhere, Patricia was running Sterling Motors with brilliant efficiency. Somewhere, the Phoenix Center was changing another life. But here, in this moment, in this garage, where everything began, they were simply Ethan and Veronica. Proof that love could grow from the most unlikely soil. The story could have ended there, with rain and contentment, but life rarely ties things up so neatly. 2 months later, Ferrari called again, this time with an offer that included relocating the entire Phoenix Center to Maranello, full funding for 20 years, and a design lab where Lucas could apprentice with the world's best engineers. It was everything Ethan had dreamed of before his life collapsed. Everything he'd thought forever lost. He brought the offer to Veronica, expecting her to be excited, but she saw the conflict in his eyes. "You don't want to go," she said. Not a question, but an observation. "I don't know what I want," he admitted. 10 years ago, I would have killed for this chance. Now, he gestured around the garage, at their life, built from scratch. "Now I have everything here." They talked through the night, weighing dreams against roots, ambition against contentment. Lucas, brought into the discussion via video call, surprised them both with his maturity. "Dad, you taught me that the best engines aren't the most powerful ones," he said. "They're the ones that run longest and most reliably. Our engine is here." The wisdom of a 14-year-old settled it. Ethan called Ferrari the next morning, declining respectfully but suggesting a partnership instead. Phoenix centers in both countries, engineer exchange programs, shared innovations. It was accepted immediately, the best of both worlds without sacrificing what they'd built. That evening, celebrating with champagne in plastic cups, Morrison stopped by with news. The board had voted to rename the company Sterling Coal Motors, recognizing that redemption had become their greatest product. The announcement ceremony was held on a Tuesday, of course, in the garage where it all began. The press was there. Board members in suits trying not to touch anything greasy. Engineers in coveralls standing proudly beside their work. Ethan stood at the podium they'd wheeled in, uncomfortable as always with public speaking but determined. 5 minutes, he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. That's all it takes to change a life. 5 minutes of courage, of kindness, of choosing to help instead of looking away. Someone asked me to give them 5 minutes once, and I did, thinking I was helping them. But those 5 minutes saved me instead. They brought me back from the dead, gave me purpose beyond survival, showed me that love isn't a limited resource that runs out when you use it up. He paused, finding Veronica's eyes in the crowd, drawing strength from her smile. Sterling Coal Motors isn't about cars, he continued. It's about second chances, about building something beautiful from broken parts. about proving that failure isn't final unless you let it be. Every engine that leaves here carries that promise that no matter how badly you've been damaged, you can run again. You can sing again. You can race towards something better than what you left behind. The applause was thunderous, but Ethan was already stepping down, moving through the crowd toward his family. Lucas hugged him first, no longer embarrassed by public affection. Then Veronica, who whispered something that made him laugh. The photographer captured them like that, three people who'd found each other through loss, who'd built something extraordinary from 5 desperate minutes in a garage. Later, after everyone had gone home, they sat on the hood of the original Valkyrie S, now a permanent display in the workshop. Lucas was sketching modifications for the next generation. Veronica was reading quarterly reports with her head on Ethan's shoulder. And Ethan was simply existing in the moment, something he'd learned to do only recently. The garage lights hummed their familiar tune, tools hung in their designated spots, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle announced another ending, another beginning. "Hey, Dad," Lucas said suddenly, looking up from his sketches. "Do you think Mom, my first mom, do you think she knew about all this?" Ethan considered carefully, feeling Veronica's hand squeeze his. "I think she knew we'd be okay," he said finally. "Maybe not the specifics, but she knew we'd find our way." "Through 5 minutes in a garage?" Lucas asked with a teenager's skepticism. "Through being open to unexpected possibilities," Veronica answered. "Through choosing hope over fear, even when fear seems safer." Lucas nodded, returning to his sketches, satisfied with the answer. The family sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Three souls who'd learned that love wasn't about replacing what was lost, but about having courage to build something new. The rain had stopped hours ago, but puddles still reflected the workshop lights like scattered stars. Somewhere, a night shift was building engines that would carry their story forward. Somewhere, another single parent was filling out a Phoenix Center application. Somewhere, 5 minutes were about to change another life. The voice that had been telling their story pulled back now, watching them from a narrative distance as they slid off the hood. Lucas yawning, Veronica suggesting hot chocolate, Ethan locking up the garage with the same care he'd shown for years. They walked toward the house they'd built behind the workshop, nothing fancy but solid and real, with a garden where Sarah's rosebush bloomed every spring, and a workshop where Lucas was designing the future. The porch light was on, welcoming them home. And as they climbed the steps, Ethan paused, looking back at the garage, where everything began. 5 minutes, he thought. 5 minutes to change everything. The door closed behind them, warm light spilling briefly into darkness before being contained inside, where love lived in ordinary moments, where three people had learned that family wasn't about blood or time, but about choosing each other, again and again, every day, for all the 5-minute increments that made up a life worth living.